Welcome to the Private Wireless podcast series from Nokia, bringing you the insights that really matter around enterprise digital transformation and wireless solutions. The series covers technology comparisons, deployment best practices, total cost of ownership assessments, analyst reviews and reports to help you make the decisions you need for your business. So keep listening. So maybe you've decided to pursue your Industry 4.0 ambitions by using a private wireless solution. Today's episode looks at the key considerations of starting your journey with a 4.9G or a 5G network, and why you can be sure that your investments are future safe. James Blackman of Enterprise IoT Insights is joined once again by Stefan Doble, Head of Marketing at Nokia Enterprise Solutions, to discuss this.
Stefan, let's start today with kind of a history lesson of sorts, I guess. You said before that you thought it might be worth looking back a little bit, just because it's sometimes forgotten that there is nothing really new about this idea of either cellular for enterprise or cellular for critical comms. Just, Stefan, if you can, explain some of that and how we got to where we are today.
That's indeed a very important thing to look at, where those technology are coming from. And actually, the common thing across the technology 4G and 5G is that they both come from a standard body called 3GPP that represents a large group of different stakeholder, both in the telecom space but also the industry. And 3GPP defines mobile radio technology for use in wide area for mobile operator networks around the world. And this is now the technology that's basically used for all the operators. And the first technology that came from this group was a GSM, or sometimes called 2G, that really dates back from 1992, which was really when the mobile phone became kind of mass market. Then we had 3G, UMTS, and then finally in 2008 was the creation of what we call today LTE or 4G, that was defined in what we call the 3GPP Release 8. And that really helped bring, on top of voice, high performance data on those public networks. And really, when you take a look at all technology starting back from 2G, the common DNA for those technology was really the need to bring consumer and enterprise as well, enterprise user, reliable mobile service, whether voice or data, in all possible environments, with the ability to support a large number of users simultaneously, those networks, but also the ability to support mobility at any kind of speed and all the way to high-speed trains, for example. Around the same time, I think around the 90s, you also had several, technology that were derived from those baseline technology. You had P25 based on CDMA or Tetra technology or DSMR, mostly leveraging some of the technology innovation around GSM or 2G that were also designed, for the need of critical communication, initially voice really. And then P25 and Tetra was really around public safety, and then GSMR was around for train. And, again, those technology leverage, the 3GPP innovation to bring wide area network communication system that really had a good level of reliability, predictability, and security in line with the requirements of those critical users. So, bottom line with those two trends, what we see that the need for reliable wireless communication is not new, and it started, back in the 90s, serving first the train communication needs as well as public safety user. But it really took time, and that's what's happened, in the last 3 or 4 years, for the industry to realize the potential for reliable high-speed data wireless networks also in industrial sites.
Great, and just another point of clarity, if you like, on reliable high-speed connectivity before we get into the whole 4G, 4.9G discussion. There is this perception that enterprises have a choice here about how to procure airtime for their industrial machines and processes, a choice between, private 5G networks and slices of public 5G networks. As I understand it, Nokia thinks that, when it comes to manufacturing sites and smart factories and other self-contained industrial plants, that network slicing doesn't really cut it, if you'll excuse the pun. Just explain, Stefan, why that is and when 5G slicing is worth a look.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, as we saw and talked about, I think in the previous podcast, they are clearly enterprise needs for critical wireless connectivity that are both on the wide area networks as well as industrial sites. And I think that the industrial side is probably the newer trend that private wireless address. And while it has already been done on the wide area network with LTE for public safety, for example, with 5G, from release 16 and 17. It introduced the concept of slicing that will enable the CSP to effectively resell wide area network services with associated SLA to guarantee the enterprise user with a good quality of service. And then once they will also have established a dense footprint of edge cloud server, they will also be able to offer guaranteed low latency on those public networks. So that's clearly one area that slicing has been designed to address. And it is true that slicing could have also a use for the enterprise, but we mostly see that for those wide area network. So what is newer here is really the fact that the same technology, whether it's 4.9G LTE and 5G, can also be used at micro scale to serve the need of an industrial site. And for an industrial site, while the slicing, could clearly help a bit on the outdoor area, if there is a good connectivity around, you cannot really beat the law of physics in terms of radio propagation, and you will always need at a minimum to deploy at least some local small cell on site to guarantee the coverage where you need it, indoor, outdoor, inside of the mine pit or the tunnel of the mine, for example. These are areas that are typically not served by public networks. Still, the need of enterprises go way beyond that. And industrial want control of these networks. They want to have maximum security, data confidentiality, so data doesn't flow back to somebody else's network, high reliability and availability of these networks that sometimes extend to several layers of redundancy. Very much like their LAN today, in effect. Those LANs are powering critical OT application. And this is where private wireless really, the networks are really coming in for the same thing, powering those highly critical OT applications. So beyond getting all the capability, just talked about, what is interesting, for private wireless network is because you design the network and your coverage based on your need, and because the capacity is really dedicated to you, you control who and what machine gets connected to it, but also because the core is deployed locally and the application can also run locally, you get significantly better performance than a public network. And what we've seen in some of the testing, we can easily shave off 10 to 30 millisecond of latency as everything is effectively on site. So, private networks really guarantees that you get the best performance out of the technology you use, whether it's 4.9G, LTE, or even 5G, because everything is under your control and only serving your specific users.
All right, so Stefan, let's get into the alphabet soup, if you like, of LTE, to borrow, your term there, because LTE has been around for a while and is developed a whole lot. But there is a lot of terminology in there. We have LTE Advanced, we have, I believe, 4.75G, I think. Nokia is using 4.9G. I mean, I get confused. So help me out if you can. What is 4.9G and why is the distinction important and more than just, a marketing term?
I mean, I think one of the things is if you look at the 4G LTE standards, as I mentioned earlier, it dates back from 2018 with, release 8. And like all 3GPP technology, and very much like good wine, it just gets better with age. And with every new release that 3GPP come up with, and all the way in that case for LTE up to release 15, the technology has been improved. And more specifically, if you look at 4G LTE, since release 11, a lot of critical connectivity and IoT feature have been added. And you may have heard the term before, as you were saying, LTE Advanced Pro, or even some folks called it 4.5G, 4.75G, that describe all those enhancements that came up to release 12 and 13. One other thing that maybe the industry didn't pick up on because we were very much into the early hype cycle of 5G is that beyond 12 and 13, there was no new name for all the things that got added after, in release 13, 14, and 15, despite the fact there was a lot of really good stuff and good improvement that were added. And this is this last version that we call 4.9G. And with 4.9G, with the concept is you really get quite a few enhancements specific to the enterprise and are very important and make those networks very capable. And, for example, with 4.9G, you get things that also are staying on with 5G. For example, LTM and narrowband IoT will provide a very deep and very wide connectivity for low power but long battery life sensor. That's something that's really important for many enterprise applications, and that's going to stay on with 5G even beyond release 18. And finally, with 4.9G, probably what's most important, you're really the closest you can to 5G. And most private wireless solution today that runs 4.9G can provide that smooth evolution to 5G, which is going to be obviously very important in a few years as you progress to 5G technology.
Okay, so Stefan, that's helpful. But let's move the conversation on to 5G, which, obviously everyone's talking about at a minute and gets a lot of column inches, but still remains arguably a little bit out of reach, certainly in terms of the kind of precision and synchronization capabilities which get the industrial set excited. But Stefan, talk about, the great promise of private 5G and what it will do for industry.
So what's important is, clearly 5G is the first, technology that's been designed from the get-go with industry in mind. And, over time will bring significant improvement to cater for almost 100% of industrial use cases. So Nokia is very excited about 5G, and that's why we have launched the industry first commercial 5G SA private wireless solution in July 2020. And we felt that the time was really ripe as the 5G architecture of the future, called 5G SA or 5G standalone, is effectively the base for all future industrial innovation that are yet to be standardized. And this architecture was complete, hence we could start providing a solution to the industry that could evolve over time to release 16, 17, and 18. And why this is important is because those newer releases are the ones that bring the bulk of the new capability that we need for those future industrial use cases, such as ultra reliable, low latency, time sensitive network, time sensitive communication, indoor positioning, etc. And these are the things that really provide a big leap of additional capability compared to 4.9G and LTE. In effect, if you look at where we are today with most chipset and system, we are at release 15, and the main benefit of release 15, mostly designed for CSP, are around increased data rate. And while that's important for industrial as well, it's mostly concerned video-based application where you, for example, can go from HD sensors or camera to 4K, or have a few more cameras per BTS, for example. So, but the bulk will come from those later release 16, 17, 18. So one of the main reasons that we've launched in 2020 as well, and that's probably the very important point I want to make here, is we wanted to provide early the whole industry and our partner a very reliable system that was industrial OEM system manufacturer could use to test 5G and really help accelerate the 5G ecosystem. Very much like we did with 4G LTE. Nokia is working hard at the moment with all our partners in that space to really show them what early 5G can already do. And this is really the first brick of the house that would help us once we get the chipset manufacturer to commit to provide, those 5G release 16, 17, and 18 industrial chipset and all the feature that goes with it, so that, the ecosystem players like the machine builders, etc., can integrate this chipset inside of the next generation system. So that's very important. And this is based on the lesson we've learned with private wireless based on 4.9G LTE, is that really the ecosystem is actually critical. The market potential for 5G is not just for private 5G, as we talked about, it's also for slicing. And we're hoping together with private 5G and 5G slicing for industrial need as well, will help ramp up the ecosystem, and the time will be shorter this time around to give us the chipset we need. So we really should not ignore that element of ecosystem that will help kickstart the market, because without those devices, industrial systems, you are quite limited to what you can do in real operation with a private 5G network. So that's why, on top of the need for 5G spectrum, vertical spectrum, and the fact that the industrial OEM have a quite slow refresh cycle, most of the analysts' recent forecasts do not see a strong 5G private wireless pickup in terms of big volumes, maybe until 2025, and 5G private wireless market will probably not overtake private wireless based on 4.9G LTE maybe until the end of the decade.
Okay, and Stefan, are there any specific segments or markets where you see a bigger drive for 5G? I mean, it seems to be manufacturing in the main part and the big flagship, manufacturing brands of the world, particularly in markets where, vertical spectrum has been freed up. Just talk about that a little bit, if you can.
Yes, that's correct. So, first of all, as you mentioned just before, there are a few markets where the vertical spectrum has been given for the industrial to use is based on newer bands. Hence, there is no ecosystem for 4G either, or it's mostly 5G bands. And in that sense, if you do not want to work with a partner that can bring you spectrum and you absolutely want to work with vertical spectrum, you have no choice. Hence, you better start with 5G and start getting going. And then as the ecosystem develop, expand your use case and run more and more things of your operation, your 5G network. From a segment point of view, rightly, the manufacturing, and in particular, the discrete manufacturing subsegment is probably the place where you have, a few applications already today or in the short-term future that could do with the enhancement that will come with 5G release 16 of 17. So in that sense, there's signs of earlier demand in that subset, in that particular subsegment. And you see this particularly visible in the automotive manufacturing industry based on the fact that they design today the factories that will build the cars in 5 or 6 years. And for that reason, they are very eager to get their hands on a private wireless 5G system, that help also test and work and drive the 5G industrial ecosystem space and ensure that when they build those factories in 3 or 4 years' time, they can really use the 5G capability that they will have put in place.
I guess if we put this finally in some perspective, and, as you said before, and as the analysts have suggested, the private cellular market in 2021 is about LTE, right, and not actually about 5G in real terms. I mean, anecdotally, from a press point of view, in terms of the messaging that comes to us, the fanfare in 2020 was all 5G, but the detail, in fact, was all LTE. And I believe release 17 with UILLC and TSN and all the other good stuff has been put back to 2022. Is that fair that industry 4.0 remains an LTE market in the short and the medium term? Here we are as we are at the start of 2021.
Yeah, so while, the key pieces of the 5G ecosystem are being, developed and put in place, the good news is 4.9G LTE can really handle the lion's share of the industry for your use case. And it is really a great place to start, on the road to 5G. And in fact, if you look at most of our customer deployments in 2020 are still very much based on 4.9G LTE. And, we anticipate the majority of our customers will, be running 4.9G LTE, maybe with 5G for at least the next 5 to 10 years. And even if you look on some of the, 30 plus, Nokia customers who have currently deployed, 5G private wireless in their premises, most of them have a concurrent, private 4.9G networks that's running their main operation while they trial test 5G. So, as we, touched on before, regarding private wireless networks and their ability to really extract the best performance of a given radio technology, because they are dedicated, private wireless based on 4.9G LTE already provides a massive leap in capability and performance compared to former, or existing wireless technology. And there has, at this point in time, rarely been a use case that we were not able to support in the deployment we've done so far. So, my final message is, Industry 4.0 and the digitalization that you need to do, is happening now. So our message to industry all are, obviously this is not about technology, but more about what use case they need to run on it, what problem they have. And really by starting early, you learn. It's a long process. You can start your digitalization early. Digital twin is one of the big applications. And that really already give you a head start, and you can start reaping the benefit of both increased flexibility, efficiency, resiliency, sustainability, etc. So there's really a lot of benefit already connecting assets and getting real-time data and getting a full overview of what's happening in your sites. And really when the time, will come for 5G, you'll anyway be in a better position with a smooth upgrade to add 5G to your sites.
Our thanks, as ever, to James Blackman of Enterprise IoT Insights and Stefan Doble, Head of Marketing at Nokia Enterprise Solutions, for joining us today. Very interesting to hear about the features and use cases enabled by 4G and 5G networks. A lot to think about for enterprises that need to decide on the best technology for implementing Industry 4.0. Thanks for listening to the Private Wireless podcast series from Nokia. Don't forget to subscribe and be the first to hear new episodes. If you're looking for more insights around all things private 4.9G LTE and 5G, contact the Private Wireless team at Nokia. To find us online, just search for Nokia Private Wireless and click Talk to an Expert to get in touch.